Hello and welcome to the program. Between the EU-Ukraine summit on the 9th and the NATO summit on the July 11th, Ukraine's diplomacy has a challenging week coming ahead. What can the country's top official expect from this discussion? Joining us today in our studio to discuss the challenges awaiting Ukraine is Yuriy Ruban, Chief of Head Department for Humanitarian Policy of the Presidential Administration. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
So since the beginning of 2014, since the beginning of the conflict, more than 1.5 million people were displaced by the conflict in Ukraine. As of today, what are the means and the structure put in place by the presidential administration to help IDPs in Ukraine?
Well, let me clarify. First of all, it's if you are speaking about infrastructure to help these people, well, to some extent to integrate them, at least temporarily, there are new places where they live now. Let me clarify that it's not the work of administration, it's the work of the whole Ukrainian authorities. I would mention, of course, executive power, cabinet of ministers, even the specific ministry was created, you know. Then a lot of efforts on the Ukrainian parliament, the special laws, the special budgetary programs were developed and adopted by the parliament in the budget, in the previous year's budgets, and so there are a lot of efforts, and we see the first results. Let me say in this way. First, of course, it's an enormous task, taking into consideration the economical, political situation, actually the situation of Russian aggression and so on. But I would say that according to different polls, the social, economical, or let me say social protection situation is much better for these people as it was, for example, in 14 or in 15. I would mention here, I would mention such, well, maybe not so official data, but we are working, for example, with different humanitarian organizations, and one of them is, for example, St. Egidius group. You know, this is group for humanitarian aid, which is supported by Catholic Church, by Rome, and Pontific, and so on. And they mentioned such a fact that they used to help people without homeless people, different kind of poor,
and now they're focusing on now they're focusing on IDPs.
And they mentioned the fact that there are no displaced person, temporarily displaced person, between these homeless or people on the Ukrainian streets. So I would.
So you're saying that IDPs tend to have a situation anyways, and are not like now on the street, or not like part of what we can consider under the below the threshold
I
of
would
poverty.
say that there are a combination of two facts. First of all, these displaced person en masse, I mean, and gross, they are mostly businessmen. No, like me say, people with some qualification, even high qualification, people with connections and so on. So they managed to put themselves in different situations, maybe not without losses, but let me say they accommodated more or less to the new situation. This is the first. According to this, I would say that a lot of people, if we are speaking about temporary people, a lot of people, they are not in Kiev or in Lviv, but they are mostly in the regions, you know, Kharkiv, not far from
where they are.
Yeah. So in Kharkiv region, in Zaporizhia, in Dnipropetrovsk, this is another maybe unofficial or maybe, but not so unofficial data. I would say that in the sociological monitoring, a few years from fall these few consequent years, they ask the same question. Do you feel yourself, they ask these people, do you feel yourself loyal citizens of Ukraine? In this area, and the dramatical increase this year. Last year it was 32%. 1/3. Now we have 32%, and the tendency to increasing.
No, just because we could spend the whole interview of IDPs. Of course, it's a deep and wide subject. But I also want to focus on humanitarian crisis in Donbass and around the front line. Now, in late 2017, the World Food Programme announced it would stop providing help to vulnerable population due to a lack of funds. Will this problem be addressed in the EU summit or with the Eastern Partnership Summit alongside the NATO summit this week? Will these humanitarian issues will be addressed to international partners?
I guess, first of all, the first platform for such a address would be United Nations, of course, because it's mostly a program United Nations. But again, to gain the necessary support and to get the necessary funding, of course, even if this funding will be through United Nations channels, of course, this is the question for EU. This is EU traditionally the biggest donor for these programs and so on. So I guess that one of the questions of this is the different kinds of financial support for Ukraine. First of all, of course, I guess President will express gratitude for giving Ukraine macro financial support. You know, 1 billion euros will be delivered to Ukraine. As far as I know, it seems to me a few days ago, European Parliament voted for this. It finished the process. Then I guess there are different kind of technical support from EU. I would remember that the figures is difficult for me just now, but I guess the different programs for these 4 years, it was something like more than 800 million euros, different kind of technical support. I would mention different reforms, like, for example, reform of civil service and so. And then, of course, there is a different kind of programs of this support, especially for these people. This is different. One is for these temporarily displaced people with limited, limited abilities. Then there are special program for the people in the nearby front line.
Which we don't necessarily have the same needs, of course, because they're more vulnerable.
This is different programs, and different agencies realize these programs. So I guess we are speaking about tens of millions euros, but of course, as you mentioned, first of all, when this program started, mostly of them started in 2014. Nobody apprehended, for example, such a long conflict, such a long aggression, and so of course there must be new time limits and new financial limits.
Now, as you said, you're working with the United Nations, with the UNDP, and there is this concept with the UNDP over the Sustainable Goal Development. One of them is the environment, being in a good environment. There's another pressing issue in Donbass right now, in Eastern Ukraine right now. It's the damage to the environment due to the flooding of certain mines from the non-controlled territories. Now, experts warned of the catastrophic outcomes from this flooding. Are there any plan to deal with this environmental issue in Eastern Ukraine resulting from the war?
Yes, let me remind to our viewers that this is a Ukrainian government that emphasized the dangers of these processes, as you mentioned, the watering of the mine and the flooding of the mines and so on. Again, now it's of course we feel that we have the understanding from our international partners of all the dangers and so on, but for the realistic estimation of the damage and to develop the projects, I guess again, maybe for different mines there must be specific projects and so on to estimate the approximate cost of this. Of course, it's necessary to be there to be present on these sites. Unfortunately, you know that before the finishing of Russian occupation, it's different to make such estimation. So there are signals of the support of Ukrainian position, understanding of the damage and understanding of the all risks. But again, to develop the realistic project, and especially if we are speaking about funding and so on, and so we need to solve the main problem, the finishing of the Russian occupation. Again, so the solution, the first and the main solution is again this, as President of Ukraine mentions the all meeting. The first, this is the peacekeeping mission solution according to Minsk agreements, and so.
And still speaking about sustainable goals, one of these goals, and I was checking the list, is also the right and the access to education. Since the beginning of the conflict, over 700 schools have been destroyed. So it denies the access to education to children on the front line. How to solve this issue as a structure to help them?
Oh, Ukraine adopted a lot of measures, starting, for example, if speaking about education. Let me say in English how to say it correctly. Зовнішнє незалежне оцінювання, external independent evaluation of the knowledge.
Monitoring? External monitoring is
no, it's after the finishing of the school, to continue education, to have
an exam.
The documents. Okay. This is the special testing system, and it was there are possible Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian Ministry of Education created possibilities for the children, for the people in the schools on the temporarily occupied territories. To pass these tests by computer and so on, so they can use, for example, they can come on for one day on the Ukrainian controlled territory and to pass these tests. Then there are special quotas for these people, for the CSU, for people after the school to to start studying in the Ukrainian university. Special quotas they were defined by the special law, and now these quotas are introduced in 6 or even now in 7 Ukrainian universities, mostly in the neighboring regions, as we mentioned, on the South Ukraine, Dnipropetrovsk region, Kharkiv region, and so on. So there are possibilities. This is the main idea of, let me again mention, the special Ukrainian law on the temporal status of these temporarily occupied territories, where it's clearly defined that this is Ukrainian citizens, they're Ukrainian citizens, they have all, let me say, rights according to Ukrainian law, and after the Ukrainian authorities would do their best in order to ensure these rights, of course, using all possibilities that we are trying to create.
Well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today. That was Yuriy Ruban, Chief of Head Department for Humanitarian Policy of the Presidential Administration. Thank you for watching the program. Stay tuned for the rest.